It's time for an all-new edition of the BWI Daily Recruiting Show. I'm Greg Pickel of Blue White Illustrated, joined as always on our Tuesday recruiting show by BWI Recruiting Insider Ryan Snyder. Ryan, it's an interesting time of year because the news is kind of just trickling out at this point. A couple of visitors confirmed today, some new offers going out as coaches hit the road. We have some NIL stuff to get into. We have a new recruiting prediction machine pick to get into that you logged over the weekend. But, by and large, May is one of the more interesting months to me on the recruiting calendar because you have a lot of this sort of downtime, if I think it's a fair way to put it, where coaches are going to all different parts of the country and schools, check in on underclassmen and just keep up relationships. So you don't necessarily get the steady stream of news that you do at other times of the year, but we've seen surprise commitments pop up. We have bunches of guys confirming their official visit plans for the summer. So I would say it's steady right now in the Penn State recruiting world. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, it's kind of a downtime for us, like you said, because news isn't as as rapid as you see in March and April. But I mean, I don't know if I'd say it's downtime for the coaches, because of all those visits that they're taking. We know, Ryan Snyder, for example, tweeted out last night that he's down in Florida. I expect him to be there the majority of the week, and they're really just all over the place, right? I mean, this is the time of the year where if you want to see a quarterback throw, this is your chance to really work him out. And of course, it's the same with other positions and and different different drills and techniques that they want to see. So it's still a very busy time of the year, but it is a little bit of a lull with prospects before official visits come up. And I know just like from talking to players and building relationships with parents, like a lot of guys are trying to reset right now. they're just worn out a little bit from spring, of course, and they know that the summer is going to be massively important. So it is a little bit quieter from that perspective. Guys are, of course, a lot of guys are trying to finish up school too. So that's important as well. But between that, you add in track for a bunch of guys. Football recruiting does take a little bit of a backseat for a good chunk of guys.
Right. So keep updated with BlueWhiteIllustrated.com as more visits are confirmed and we get ready for what's going to be a crazy June, but we'll keep you updated here in May as the month rolls along as well. Let's get into our first topic of the day, Ryan. It's name, image, and likeness guidelines released on Monday by the NCAA. We're talking on Tuesday, May 10. So we've had about, I don't know, maybe 12 to 16 hours to digest these things. And I mean, my main takeaway is this. They were specifically called guidelines and not rules for a reason, because I just don't think the NCAA is going to enforce these unless it's the most egregious, outlandish way of getting around them, if that would come to light. But, ultimately, then there would still have to be lawsuits and things like that. So, I guess we wanted to touch on this briefly because obviously NIL is such a big topic of conversation, but I'm just not sure this is the thing that's going to put the toothpaste back in the tube, so to speak. It just feels like another issued edict that is really a lot of empty words when all is said and done.
We'll find out. I guess that's the only thing you can really say. I mean, to me, this is trying to fix the issue that they didn't fix last year, when they put these guidelines into place and kept it so open because they were, scared of antitrust lawsuits and all that. So, now they're trying to put in the rule that they should have put in a year ago. I mean, I guess, like you said, actually, it's not really a rule, but, they are basically just trying to push the fact that collectives shouldn't be talking to prospects, before a player signs. Once a player signs, then you can work things out. But, all the different, I'm trying to think who was it? Nico, Iamaleava, of course. And, the $8 million with Tennessee. And, we're seeing a lot of other, players who have now since signed, things are kind of coming out with that 2023 class or 2022 class. So, I think it's just on the schools to police themselves, man. And I don't see how that's ever really possible. The only way it could really ever work is if Tennessee and A&M and Miami and some of these schools who are just going massively hard on the collective world, scale it back a bit and just focus on the players who have signed. But is that ever realistic? I don't really think
No.
it is now that we've opened Pandora's box. But
No, why would you? What incentive do you to have to dial it back at all? I mean, what incentive is out there right now to dial things back? There isn't any. I mean, it's
No.
lawlessness basically. So, I mean, if you knew you could loot the high end store and get away with it every single time, because there's no way of getting stopped or no repercussions you'd have to face, why would you ever stop? And I think that's where we're at here. So that's the issue. And I think you've been trying to warn folks now for quite a number of months that this will cost Penn State and other schools, of course, at some point. But as these stories continue to come out and as they try and put guidelines in place that don't really guide anyone to change what they're doing, it's becoming more and more of a reality. I think with each passing day is probably the simplest way to put it.
Yeah, the only way I can see it really getting enforced down the road is if they do crack down and they do, hurt some schools, right? And that's what makes me think that it is possible, just because that's the only way I think everyone will take it serious. You could
Mhm.
obviously, I mean, you can go to some of these players who, especially like transfer portal guys, you can go to them and take away their eligibility. The NCAA does
Right.
have the right to talk to players and kind of get a feel for how this all went down, and then they can crack down. But do they really want to do that? I don't know. It's just a really interesting time, and really, like I said, man, the only way I can see something happening is just if they do decide to crack down on some of these schools who are throwing crazy money at guys before they actually enroll. So maybe that'll come. You don't seem to think that's going to come. I'm doubtful myself, but again, I mean, that's just why I look at it like it's on the schools to police themselves, and that's why we have an NCAA in the first place. So
Right. Yeah.
I'm not
I
very
mean, look, I look at
optimistic
it like
about it.
this, man. So the NCAA has there's some kind of acronym for it that always reminds me of WASP. That's not what it is, but the independent group that was supposed to investigate things. And I mean, they've been around for a couple years now and they haven't investigated
Mhm.
anything. So it's hard for me to believe that they're going to be able to find out what's going on, investigate it, and hand down penalties anytime over the next few years. I'd be willing to bet that the Power Five breaks away from the NCAA and just does its own
Oh
thing
yeah.
in football before the NCAA would actually crack down on anybody for doing anything related to NIL and pay for play and things like that. We'll see. I've been wrong before. There's plenty of episodes of the BWI Daily Recruiting Show to you back and pick through and hear things that I was boasting about incorrectly. But I mean, ultimately, I just don't see. I don't see what NCAA could change fast enough to get itself in a position to do anything about this at this point. I just think we're way too far down the tracks at this point. You mentioned that they should have done this last year, and yeah, I mean it's just they were afraid of lawsuits, continue to be afraid of lawsuits, and that's not going to change.
Hmm. You pretty much said it there. I don't I don't have a whole lot more to add. I don't have a. I mean, I would think that this. I guess maybe the one thing I will add is just how does this change maybe anything with the 2023 class and some of the guys. I mean, like I said, I don't see it much, but maybe a few schools will be scared, and maybe that'll help in some ways. But and really one thing I'd like to learn is just kind of how Penn State's gonna attack this as well. I mean, I would love to do an interview with some of the people working with their collectives or people in Penn State's compliance staff. But I have so many questions right now, and this is a complicated subject too. I mean, that's the one thing I'd say. It's just so many layers to this. Like I feel
Right.
like whenever I'm starting to figure it out, uh, then there's something else that kind of comes out where I just have more questions than answers. But until the schools, like I said, man, until the schools police themselves, I just don't see this changing a whole lot.
No update, by the way, to the NIL story we talked about on last week's show, which of course you can always find at youtube.com/Blue White Illustrated or wherever you get your podcasts for the latest shows and also the replay of shows you may have missed. Jordan Addison, the tremendous Bolitnikoff Award winner and receiver at Pittsburgh, still has not made up his mind as to where he's going to go. So the early smoke was he was going to leave the Panthers and go to USC. We'll see what happens there. But all right, that is the NIL portion of the BWI Daily Recruiting Show. Ryan Snyder and Greg Pickel here with you on Tuesday, May 10. Stay tuned for later this week. London Montgomery caught up with T. Frank, who's producing today's show, to talk about his recruitment and where things stand as his official visit window gets set. So make sure to keep an eye on BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, YouTube.com/Blue White Illustrated, and of course wherever you get your audio, Apple, Spotify, or Google, or anywhere else you find podcasts, you'll find us. London Montgomery coming up on the Wednesday edition of the BWI Daily Show. Right, let's move on to our second topic for today. Obviously, Penn State is at a point now where we're seeing we're seeing players across the country rather start to limit their list a little bit. Guys going from anything from 25 to 3 to 15 to 10, and just about anything in the middle. It's that time of year after spring visits and things like that. And then Alabama safety, who I believe we both have had the chance to talk with, put Penn
Mhm.
State on his shortened list not too long ago. It's TJ Metcalf, a relative of DJ Metcalf, who, of course, is the NFL receiver. Arkansas, Florida State, Georgia, Jackson State, Miami, Michigan, Michigan State, Ole Miss, Penn State, and Tennessee are the players or the schools still involved for him at this point in time.
Mhm. I just where's he at on Penn State's board? That's kind of one thing
Right.
I need to get a better feel for because when I ask around and I see the official visits being set, TJ's name is certainly a player they're interested in, but he doesn't have an official set to Penn State right now, so that kind of perks my interest, especially when you look at Dakari Nelson, for example, Cam Seldon, those guys do have official visits set. Conrad Hussey's already committed. Of course, King Mack, we've been talking about him a lot in recent weeks. I'm trying to get a better feel if King Mack's going to be a safety or corner. I've heard mixed things there. Some people said he could play corner. Some people said he's definitely a safety. So just trying to get a better answer there. Right now, it seems like Ole Miss is certainly in a good position with TJ Metcalf. He's visited 3 times. What that means moving forward, we'll see. Of course, he's actually visited like 8 or 9 schools too, so he's been pretty active and hasn't been to Penn State for a little while now. So, do I think a whole lot's going to come out of Penn State and TJ Metcalf? Not really at the moment, but we'll continue to keep an eye on him. He did visit in January. So it was a little bit more recent than I thought. I was thinking of
Yeah.
Dakari Nelson, who came for the Rutgers game, but right now, man, I don't really see Metcalf being much of a player here, or Penn State, excuse me, being much of a player with Metcalf. But we'll see what happens.
You are listening to the BWI Daily Recruiting Show. He's Ryan Snyder. I'm Greg Pickel. We are rolling along here as, again, you're going to see these top lists come out from time to time. There's another one, class of 2023 receiver Ryan Manning put Penn State on his short list. But again, if you sign up for $1 for 1 year of access to Blue White Illustrated, you can check out Ryan's receiver rundown as we come out of spring practice. And, I just want to flag here that sometimes guys are going to put Penn State into a top group, and it might just be a hat on the table, and that might be because of where the player stands or where Penn State stands. And sometimes you just don't know the answer to that. But keep
Mhm.
that in mind because, again, you are going to start seeing, I know you got something to say, Ryan, so I'll kick it to you here, but you're going to start seeing
Yeah.
a lot more of those lists filtering out here, I think, over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I think Ryan Manning's a good player. We have him at like 5'9", 5'10", so that's a little bit of a red flag just because there's a few guys that are just higher on their board with that kind of size, right? And then also just St. Francis, until Penn State has serious momentum or even gets a single player from St. Francis, it's just hard for me to take it too seriously there. So I don't really think Manning is going to be much of or Penn State's. I did that again. I don't think Penn State's going to be much of a player with Manning. But we'll see how that progresses. I'm just not very. He's not a player I'm really focused on at the moment.
Yeah, and keep in mind too, I think it's worth pointing out that when you look at a top 5 at this time of year, then head over to that player's On3 profile and check where his visits are, if he has official visits set or unofficial visits set,
Mhm.
because that can oftentimes tell you a lot about who is kind of leading here. I mean, check out the recruiting prediction machine on three's algorithm for trying to predict where players will end up as well. But yeah, I mean, if you see a school that's in a top X list but doesn't have an official visit yet, and others do, you can kind of figure out where things are in the pecking order. Again, sometimes that's going to be the player's choice, sometimes that'll be the school's choice. But of course, there's still some guys setting things up, so don't read too far into it. But keep it in mind. I
Mhm.
guess is where I
One
that conversation. Ryan.
Well, with that, I mean, one player that we should talk about probably is Johnny Shakir, who
Right.
there's a lot of talk right now that Johnny's thinking about making a move here soon. He's been to Penn State a ton, right? And I do think he's a player that Penn State will take. I was trying to see just learn more about track times and stuff. I mean, like I said, Penn State's always kind of curious on where guys are, how they're running and all that stuff. I think Penn State wants to see a little bit, wants to just learn a little bit more about that situation. But I do. I do think there's a real chance that Johnny Shakir could be committing to Penn State here in the near future. And, for the longest time, I was told nothing, but positive things. And I still think when push comes to shove, he will probably be a Nittany Lion, whether that's this week or down the road. I mean, he does have an official visit set for, in June. And we don't know of any other official visits to other schools. He went to West Virginia, he went to Rutgers. But as I said, man, he's been to Penn State 5 times, I believe, since last summer. So, talk about the visits tell you everything. Johnny certainly makes sense there. So we are watching him closely. I haven't put in an RPM pick. I've just been kind of waiting to try and get a little more information from, some people I trust. But, some of my colleagues have. Brian Doan, of course, 24/7. He put out a crystal ball for Johnny last week. And, Brian's a good friend of both of ours. So, I'm always interested in seeing what he thinks. And we'll keep an eye on Johnny here in the coming days. But right now, he is certainly a player to watch for potential commitment here before June.
So the data for on three's recruiting prediction machine for Johnny Shakir has Penn State as a 96.6% favorite. So things certainly looking in the right direction there. Crystal or a recruiting prediction machine pick from Ryan would certainly bump things up even further. But you'll have to stay tuned to Blue Whale Illustrated for that. Yes, go ahead.
I should let you finish your promo. My bad. Well, one thing I'll say, one thing people don't know is for our recruiting prediction machine, it takes crystal balls from 24/7 into effect or into account. So Ajani was he was still pretty high, because of all those visits, but with Doan putting in a crystal ball for Ajani last week, that bumped it up to where it is now, which is almost 97%. So that's just one thing for fans to know, that the recruiting prediction machine takes everything into account. It's not just us, what we do here. It's at 24/7. I believe it's with Rivals too. I'm not exactly sure. I know it's definitely with 24/7. So we're always, and this is kind of like with the consensus ranking, right? Like we're trying to get everybody's opinion and put it in one spot, so fans can always can just try and get the facts right for not just what we think at On Three, but everybody in the recruiting industry.
It's the BWI Daily Edition recruiting show. He's Ryan Snyder telling you more about on3.com. Obviously, our parent site here, and BlueWhaleIllustrated.com is where you can find the latest Penn State news and all that recruiting intel and so much more. Ryan, let's get into another topic we have here. It's a perfect segue, speaking of the recruiting prediction machine, because you did not log on. I may or may not have tried to set you up to get there, and we did. We found the right way home, so that was good for us. But you did put one in for a offensive lineman over the weekend, and I think that's obviously something that caught a lot of people's attention. But it's a guy that if you've been paying attention here on the Blue White Illustrated, the BWI Daily recruiting show, you've heard Ryan talk a lot about him of late.
Yeah, just everything's adding up for Zach Owens, who, of course, was just here for the Blue-White game. What was it, a couple weeks ago, of course. That's his only visit to Penn State so far. But, man, I mean, we talked about it. I think we've talked about it now on like 3 straight podcasts, right? Like just watching him down there on the sidelines, getting to know all the guys, man. He looked like he was already committed. And, since then, we've talked multiple times. He's has a close relationship with Josh Miller. They've known each other for a long time. And a lot of the other commits that he's since met have been on him. So that's one thing I always like to see, right? Having a good relationship with the committed guys, that's massive. So that's one thing that kind of checks the box for me. And then just the way he raves about Penn State's coaches, calling Phil Troutwine more of a father figure than a recruiter, stuff like that. It always kind of grabs my attention. But when I look at the landscape right now, I think Clemson's in the mix for sure. Michigan's also potentially in there. We'll see. I mean, I was told that they're trying to work out an official visit. Right now, we have Owen set for an official visit to Clemson the first week in June. And then he was going to come to Penn State the 17th to the 19th. And then I was told Penn State actually pushed that back to the final weekend, which is always intriguing to me, right? Because they want to get that very last visit. I don't even know if it's really going to matter. I think Owens is already pretty much firmly in Penn State's camp. I think Penn State's firmly in the Owens camp. Of course, his family's from New York City as well. So, yeah, he is playing down there in Georgia, but he has more ties to the Northeast than really, down there. So I think everything's just adding up for Penn State right here. And, man, massive player too, 6'5.5", 385. And I've had a lot of people ask about that 385. Like, he wears it great. I've seen sloppy 385 in my life. He's not a sloppy 385.
No.
Could he drop some weight? Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think if he got down to 350, it would certainly help with some movement and things like that. And I'm sure Penn State, they'll get that ship righted if he were to end up here. But everything's looking pretty positive right now for Zach Owens and Penn State, and of course Samson Okunlola and Evan Link are both out there, and I don't know if they. I mean, I think last week we talked about like could they take 7? Maybe that was with T Frank and I. Uh, I don't know. I mean, I still think 6 is very realistic. So if you can get Owens on board here in the coming months, and of course then Sampson seems like he's going to drag it out a little bit. Evan Link's just gotten totally quiet. Evan and I have had a great relationship, and I haven't gotten much out of him much lately. But the point is, get Owens on board here at some point in the summer, and then you can just kind of push all your chips in with the other two and see what happens. One last thing, I am dragging this on here, but one last thing, Owens is kind of right now aiming for an early August commitment. I'll just be curious to see if that gets changed, kind of like Jameel Lyons, right? Jameel
Right.
Lyons was planning for down the road, but we already kind of knew where he was leaning. Owens kind of fits that category as well. So let's see if he holds to it or maybe makes a move a little bit sooner. Well, only time will tell.
We will see dates scheduled and then moved up and moved around because, as we all know, the commitment dominoes will start falling this summer. And once they do, it can become a wild ride to make sure players lock up their spots at schools and that schools lock up players they really want before they head elsewhere. That's what makes it fun to follow as we wait for the start of another Penn State football season. Ryan, let's get into our final topic on this week's show, and that's going to be. So maybe I'll just take a minute here and regroup
Yeah,
myself. It's going to be official
take some water,
visits.
man.
Let me just get this prepped and then I'll throw it to you. It's going to be official visits season here in the next month. We both wanted to pick an intriguing guy that stands out to us on the list. Who's your selection?
So this is an interesting one, right? Because I think if I told Penn State fans this without the caveat, I think they wouldn't think it's intriguing. But to me, it's Rodney Gallagher, and there's a couple reasons why. One, I thought Penn State was leading for the longest time with Rodney Gallagher. Two, I'm not really that confident in that anymore. I think Notre Dame has a very real chance at landing him. And then you got this West Virginia aspect too, where there's a lot of talk that they're pushing hard with NIL with him. Like I said last week on the podcast, I never really realized how close he is to West Virginia, which makes him like maybe one of the most important recruits in Neil Brown's tenure at West Virginia, just because of the proximity to home. Yeah, he's not from West Virginia, but he's right over the border. So to me, I'm not nearly as confident as I was in Rodney Gallagher ending up at Penn State a couple months ago. And this is a player that we've said for the longest time Penn State has to land. This is no doubt about it. You have to get this guy. If you don't, I'm going to call it a disaster or anything like that, but it would hurt. So just the way I'm reading things now, and the fact that Notre Dame's coming on as hard as they are, West Virginia is very much in the mix. I will also say that Penn State does have that last official visit too, like we were just talking about with Zach Owens. We know he'll be here. This last school he'll be at. So just curious to see how that one plays out, man. Because right now, man, I feel like other schools have some serious momentum with Rodney Gallagher.
Yeah, so he currently is a Penn State. Penn State leads in his recruiting prediction machine, but these visits are going to tell all of the tale, and I don't think any of the data that we use for until some picks are made anyway can really fully accurately describe kind of how this has become such a three horse race for him, if you will. And it's going to be fascinating because it seems like we got three schools neck and neck here in Penn State, and it certainly feels like they have to land him, and I think the other two probably do as well. So it's going to be a fascinating recruitment to watch. Ryan, you got to talk to his dad recently, and we're going to leave most of that info for subscribers. So it's just $1 for a year. You can't get it any cheaper, folks. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Check us out there. But I mean, I think you mentioned this earlier, so I just wanted to revisit it though. But the general prevailing sense at this point is he and many, many other prospects and their families, they need some downtime this month, right? I mean, they need to all kind of recharge and reset prior to what will be, for most of them, a month of June that will decide where they end up playing college football.
Yeah. I mean, I just Rodney's an incredible kid, and just from my talks with him, in the beginning of the process to my talks with him now, you can just tell that he's getting worn out a bit, and it's because of how interested, so how many schools are interested in him, and then two, all the reporters that kind of flock on him because of that, right? West Virginia, like I said, they have a strong beat, so their reporters are on him hard. Obviously, we have a strong beat. We want to know as much as we can, and then you have Notre Dame, who probably has the strongest beat of them all, out of those three schools as far as interest and the amount of just different sites and whatnot that cover him. So I think just from that perspective, he needs to recharge a little bit. Of course, he had a long basketball season as well, and this will probably be one that he went from basketball right into visits, and now this will kind of be a little area for him to recharge. So for me, I like to always try and just do whatever I can to not be that guy, adding on top of just constant costs basically. So I'll probably transition a little bit more to talking to Rodney's dad a little bit and try and give him a break, because Rodney's a great kid. And I just, I know that if that was my son, that's what I would want other people to do.
Right.
But one thing I will say just from talking to Rodney's dad is like, he's very, I don't know what's the best way to put it. I mean, he was very honest with us in our conversation. And I think he really raved about Marcus Freeman, and that's one thing that kind of stood out to me. Not that he didn't rave about Terry Smith. I mean, we put out a graphic, about him talking about how honest Terry is, and how he's handled this whole process with Rodney. But he also just really made it clear to me how much of an impression Marcus Freeman has made on his son, and same with Neil Brown as well. So just the more I talk and the more I dig there, man, I really feel like this is more wide open than I originally thought a couple months ago.
Do you see this being a recruitment won by one of the three head coaches, or is it going to be the collection of everything that goes into eventual decisions?
It's a good question. It might be just because of how much I think Marcus Freeman's had an impact on it. But it's tough to say too, because of how much Terry Smith has an impact there too. So it's something I'd rather probably get a better answer on than just BSing you guys and thinking one way or the other. I do think as well, NIL is going to have an impact on this as well. I mean, when you look at our NIL algorithm, right? Where's Rodney Gallagher ranked? I mean, he is one of the most coveted athletes in all of high school football. I mean,
Number
his
26,
evaluation,
Ryan, with a valuation of let's see here, just about 200
227,000.
and yeah, yep.
Yeah. So I mean, I obviously, like, if I'm his parents, like, you put that to the side. You don't want to overthink that too. But man, I mean, look at his social media following. He's got over 100,000 followers total, 85,000 people on Instagram alone. Like, there is a I mean, he makes sense, right? From an NIL
Right.
perspective, he's what companies want as far as getting your message out there to teenagers and people in your 20s. So, how could NIL not come into play for Rodney Gallagher? I mean, his dad made it very. Now, let me also say, his dad made it very clear that isn't the number one thing, which also makes sense, right? Like, everybody wants to get to the NFL. That should always kind of be your number one goal when you're going through this process. Who will better my son, and who will help him get to the NFL where the real money's at? But some of these schools have bigger offers from an NIL perspective than others. I just don't know how you don't take that into play, especially when your son has this type of social media following, and on top of that, like, Ronnie's just a genuine person too. Like, he would
Right.
be pretty good for working with companies, and like, he's a smart individual. He's well spoken. There's a lot of things that, like, hey, this makes sense for as far as companies being interested in him. So. Like I said a million times, this is going to be the first class that I really think NIL dominates on. And of course, we open this podcast with maybe they're trying to cut back on that. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. But, until I see it, I expect this to continue to be, a situation where collectives can just kind of go hard after these uncommitted guys, whatever no matter what the NCAA says. And Ronnie Gallagher makes a lot of sense from that perspective.
It'll be a fun one to watch. My pick, just quickly as we wrap up this edition of the BWI Daily Recruiting Show, I went with Owens. Just a fascinating situation there where he has some roots here, but he's obviously living currently out of the region, but he's a big-time offensive lineman that Penn State has really just seemed to climb the ranking for, or climb the ladder for, if you will, over the last couple of months here. And, I mean, look, we can say it until we're blue in the face about you need to get Rodney Gallagher, you need to get big-time playmakers and things like that. Well, I mean, as we all know, Penn State's biggest challenge over the last few years has been consistent offensive line play. And you find more consistent offensive line play with your high four-star guys, which is exactly what Owens is. So he catches my eye, but look, if you go to BWIIllustrated.com, click on that FB recruiting tab, and then go to visits, you can see that there are numerous guys who we could have singled out and highlighted here for sure.
Yeah, let me roll through that. I mean, like, Caden Proctor, for example, I think, like, he would be a guy that stands out to a lot of
Right.
fans. I just I just don't see it happening. Like I just, I constantly, whenever I ask about him, I just kind of keep getting that like communications inconsistent. And of course, if you're Penn State, you have to host a player like him, right? He's an elite offensive tackle prospect. But to me, I mean, Penn State's kind of, I guess they're top 5 because they're going to get an official visit, but they're towards the bottom of that list. Of course, there's like a guy like Tamaria Parker, of course, from Alabama. But like at the end of the day, I just see him staying down in Florida. I mean, I guess one player we probably should have maybe highlighted is Tony Rojas as well, because he's in a
Right.
similar situation to Gallagher in some ways where, man, it felt like Penn State the whole time. And let me also clarify, like, I feel more confident right now in Tony Rojas ending up at Penn State than Ronnie Gallagher. But,
Interesting.
add in Clemson, add in Georgia, add in some of these schools that are just constantly, among the best in the country. They have tons of NIL money, all that stuff. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention Miami, who's like, one of the top schools out there when it comes to collective stuff. I just think that'll be very interesting. But, there's a long list of guys, fans can go check it out. We don't make all the official visits public. I keep some kind of on the low until the player basically puts it out there. But once it's out there publicly, we do up this page. So fans that even if you're not subscribed to us, you can check out the ones who, again, have been kind of announced publicly so far.
But you should be subscribed to us. It's $1 for 1 year of access.
You should.
BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Also subscribe to our podcast feed and YouTube channel, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, YouTube.com/BlueWhiteIllustrated. That was Ryan Snyder. I'm Greg Pickel. We're wrapping up this edition of the BWI Daily Recruiting Show. Remember to tune back in tomorrow and every weekday for the latest Penn State news from Thomas Frank Carr. On Wednesday, it'll be London Montgomery, the running back in the class of 2023, catches up with T. Frank about what lies ahead for his recruitment. And that will do it for this edition of the BWI Daily Recruiting Show. We will catch you next time.